Okay, well, very good to see you all. Thank you all for being so patient on a sleepy afternoon. The Eden Valley in Cumbria, some of you, I hope, may have seen, and anyone who hasn't seen it, please come and see it soon. The most sparsely populated district in the most sparsely populated constituency in England. You will hear my colleagues speak soon about neighbourhood as the square mile. In the place where I come from, neighbourhood as the square 100 miles. And most of the challenges we face in our two main initiatives at the moment, one of which is a superfast broadband pilot, and the other one of which is a big society vanguard project, are problems of distance, problems of isolation. And it's hardly necessary for me to point out what those are, but I'll just run through them just to give a sense of the kind of challenges that rural communities face, and a sense why, ironically, we often assume that a rural community is the least high priority for this kind of delivery. But in fact, actually, there is almost nothing that you can imagine which could so rapidly or effectively transform the society, the economics, the politics of a place like the Eden Valley in Cumbria than broadband. My neighbour, for example, has Parkinson's, and she, every week, does a 4.5-hour round trip to the Newcastle General Hospital just to talk to a neurologist. The village in which I live used to have 3 grammar schools. There is now not only not a grammar school, there's not even a primary school within 9 miles of that community. It's more and more difficult for children to get to school, and this is a national phenomenon in rural areas. We've lost 2,200 schools since 1997, and about 550 hospitals and clinics. The basic energy of the modern age, as you can imagine, is about stripping out small schools, small clinics, small hospitals, pushing for economies of scale, which makes a lot of sense in technological terms, but in terms of a rural community is a catastrophe, because, of course, at the same time as we're losing public services, we've lost 7,500 pubs in the same period, we've lost hundreds of village post offices and schools, we've lost hundreds of police stations, etc., etc. We've just lost, and when I was selected as a candidate, we had 6 magistrates' courts in Penrith and the Border. Some of those courts had operated unbroken since the early 13th century. There are now not a single court in the area. So if you want to deal with your parking fine or go and see a magistrate, you now have to get from Kirkby Stephen up to Carlisle, which again is about a 3-hour round trip. These are all obvious things which could be overcome through decent broadband access. My neighbour with Parkinson's would be able to speak to her consultant neurologist in Newcastle without leaving her home. You'd be able to testify in the magistrate's court without leaving your home. Children could take classes that they might not even be able to get in the area. Village shops could band together as cooperatives in order to buy products at a better rate. Village halls can share information, and community networks can be built. Instead of printing fancy parish magazines, etc., all these things can happen online. Now, so much for the use, and that, of course, is what today is largely about, and that's what I'm very, very keen to work with everybody on this room on, and to invite you up to Cumbria and get us involved. But the real platform that we have to offer, the real competitive advantage we have to offer, is our communities. Essentially what is happening in Cumbria, because public services are so far away, because really of a history of neglect, these communities have become astonishingly energetic and resilient. So, for example, when Great Asby was told that they couldn't have any broadband, which was a perfectly sensible observation from BT, because they are about 20 miles from the M6 fibre network, they set up their own broadband network. They put a little transmitter on the top of the church, they broke into the school fibre, they sent it up to a small windmill attached, small solar panel attached to a tree on the top of a hill, and now 75% of the community in Great Asby have their own community-owned broadband network. As soon as that happened, no less than 120 other broadband activists from 120 other villages in Cumbria then gathered in Great Asby in November, and now all of them have gone back to their communities, and they're all working on different things. Some of them are working on getting more people online, some of them are working on gathering equipment, some of them are working on actually building their own community broadband networks. We have a website, please look at it, called Broadband Cumbria. You will see that if you go on Broadband Cumbria, all these different parishes, all these activists are now engaged in conversation. When Barry Ford posted his new idea on a community network last week. I think we got 350 responses written up to that single proposal. So it's a very, very energized conversation. This isn't, as I say, really what today is about, because obviously superfast is just a very small part of this, and we are looking at other forms of delivering broadband. We are looking at satellite, we are looking at wireless solutions, but I just want to touch for a moment on superfast broadband delivery, because it gives you an idea that sometimes when you think about big society, you think about communities, one can think about them in quite a patronizing way. One can imagine that somehow a parish council in Cumbria is sort of Miss Marple figures drinking cups of tea and worrying about how to mow the village green, right? One would imagine, perhaps, if you had that kind of mentality, that the delivery of fibre to the premise in an extremely remote part of the Lake District is not something that a parish council would get involved in. Right? You would have thought that they would be defeated by an incredible number of technological problems, legal problems, state aid issues, regulatory issues, all of which are enough generally to defeat the most sophisticated county council officer. All of which mean, as you know, that over the last 15 years, the government has not been very good at procuring broadband contracts. As you can imagine, what actually happens for anybody in this room, I mean, you, of course, know more about this than anyone else, but if you actually get into a discussion of how you're going to get fibre to a premise in a very remote part of Cumbria, you hit everything, right? First of all, of course, the supplier says, well, yes, we can do it, but it's going to cost £50 a metre to dig in the cable, right? Now, obviously, if you're 20 kilometres from the M6 fibre network, that'll cost you £1 million immediately. So then you think, okay, well, I've got a solution to that. You know, we'll dig our own trench, we'll lay our own fibre, and we can probably do that for about £5 a metre. Fine. But then what do you do with the fibre once you've dug it in? Are you allowed to connect it, for example, to the BT cabinet? How much will they charge you for that? Even if they allow you to connect, and even if they drop the charge for connection, how much are they actually going to charge you for the data going up and down? Are you going to end up being charged, if you want, for example, 100 meg symmetric, £350 a month for your service? So then you think, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push BT to drop that price, at which point BT says, actually, we're regulated by Ofcom. The £70 per meg per month we're charging is a regulated price. So then you think you can jump round the back of the state aid issue and jump onto the schools network, which is what we did in Great Asby. Everything seems absolutely fine until you get back to the peering point. Now, the reason I'm talking about all this level of complexity is you would have thought that these kinds of questions are not the kind of questions which a parish council can deal with. But in fact, what we've discovered, and what you'll see if you go on the website, is that when you put 100 different parish councils together thinking about these issues, they can actually solve every one of them much more quickly than a county council officer could ever do. They can question almost every element of the procurement because they actually get on the ground and they photograph every cabinet. They measure every distance. They check up on every state aid issue. They look at every form of alternative technology. They get in touch with Geo. They break into the M6 fibre network. And in the end, you can end up in a situation where if the government's imaginative and if the government's supportive, a community such as that in Leith and Lyvennet may be able to create their own community-owned superfast network with fibre to every premise at a cost to the taxpayer of about £300 per home. Now, fibre to the cabinet, quoted normally in that area, was supposed to be £1,000 a home. Fibre to the premise was supposed to be £5,000 a home. The reason they're able to do this is not just about their knowledge, not just about their power, not just about their muscle, not just about the money they're prepared to put in the project, it's about legitimacy. Now, legitimacy is a fancy, pretentious word, and we normally associate it with parliaments and governments. But actually, at a parish level, at a big society level, what legitimacy means is that if a parish council turns up and says to you, as a farmer, look, we can do this project if you're prepared to waive the wayleaves. Will you let us run a fibre cable across your field and not charge us for it? Or if you go to someone in their house and say, okay, we can get you this if you'll dig from your front door to the road. Or if you say, we can get you this if you're prepared to pay £60 a year for 20 years. In other words, we'll lend you £1,000 at a low interest rate. They won't do that for government. I mean, I could forget it. Central government turns up and says to a community, yeah, you can have a super fast broadband network through British Telecom provided you, the farmer, wave the way leave, provided you dig your own trench, provided you put up £60 a year. Forget it. But if a parish council says it, your sense of citizenship, your sense of your neighbours, your sense of your community transforms that whole calculation totally, meaning that a community can end up with a much, much faster, higher quality, 100 meg symmetric network, owned and managed by that community at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time. What I'd love to work with, and this is where I'm going to conclude, what I'd love to work with all of you, though, is not just that side of it, not just the infrastructure side, because I said we're also really obsessed with getting 100% of people to get at least the 2 meg access. This isn't all about the super fast fantasies. But love to work with you on how to use the energies of those communities, which range from young volunteers, 16-year-olds in National Citizen Service who are trying to design projects for the summer where they're giving up 64 hours, 3,000 young children in Cumbria giving up 64 hours of their summer to try to work on volunteering projects, through to a very, very large number of very dynamic young retired people aged between 60 and 65, very, very keen to put full-time work in as volunteers, and to work with you on all those elements of training, inclusion, use, applications, so that when the communities really put this into play, this part of the Eden Valley of Cumbria is not just a symbol of community and big society, not just a symbol of broadband infrastructure, but the symbol of the way, to return to the first point, the way in which we can transform our economy, our politics, and our society. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.